sometimes you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you're just reading, especially because of the group. You're just reading to stay up with what they're reading and you're trying to understand. And then there's a sentence or a paragraph that goes, and you're like, oh, I want another one of those.
What is the most memorable conversation that you've had about James Joyce?
Oh, gosh. That's hard to say, because all of my conversations about James Joyce are in this context, in this Zoom Joyce context. And outside of this, there aren't any.
Wow, okay.
So picking a favorite, I don't know. I don't know who else you've interviewed or what they're like, but I don't consider myself a scholar. I have no degrees, and I just really like reading.
Yeah, for sure. No, most of the people actually, like, the point of the project is I'm kind of tired of talking to scholars, so I want to talk to more just like fans.
Okay.
And actually the first couple of people that I interviewed just to kind of like get the project rolling were my dad and my brother, who like haven't read any Joyce. So we just kind of talked about their like, you know, general idea of what he did and stuff. So yeah, don't feel pressured to be like, to know.
I would have to say, if you try to have a conversation about James Joyce or one of his characters, most people will just stare blankly at you and try to get away.
Oh no.
Most people I know don't like talking about books. I think this whole Zoom thing has saved my life. It's the silver lining of COVID. Like now all my friends are in my house with me once or twice a week talking about the things that I like to talk about.
That's fantastic. So how did you find like the online Joyce community?
I have just been really lucky. I was in book clubs for many years, just regular type book clubs with, you know, wine and talking about books, but kind of just mayhem. But, you know, the very first book club I was ever in, and the very first book we ever read was The Odyssey, which I think is great. So we kind of started with classics and just moved forward. So it just so happened that I was invited to be in a Ulysses book club, in a Finnegans Wake book club by somebody who I was doing another book club with. And I was so flattered. And I remember that the first time I went, all of my friends are much older than me, and I'm always a little intimidated. And the first time I went, I was just chewing on my hands, and it was the first time I had seen Finnegans Wake, and I was just like, wow. Like I waited to open the book until I got there. Oh no. But it just like a lot of people, I was like, okay, there's treasure in here. I'm gonna find it.
Yes, for sure.
And they asked me to come back, and they were happy to have me there. I was like, all right. So really, to be a fan of James Joyce or his work, you just have to maintain interest. You don't have to be smart. You just have to keep looking.
Wow, I totally agree. No, I think that that's so true. I've heard it also described as this sort of like patience or commitment that it takes of like, once you get in, if you just stick with it, like, you know, you don't have to write articles about it to, you know, enjoy it.
Yeah, you don't have to understand it.
Yeah, okay.
That's a beautiful thing. It being a legitimate place to stand with Joyce is that you don't get it, but you're still working on it, still taking it in. You know, that's one of the beauties of reading Joyce, is that you can take that stance. You don't have to say something smart or get it or anything. You just have to keep reading.
So was that book club with Finnegans Wake? It probably wasn't your like first like introduction to Joyce, or was it? I don't know, but what was that first time?
It kind of was. I mean, I read Portraits of the Artist in high school, but in high school I was very young. I graduated at 17, and I was a young 17 even then. So I always got good grades, and I wrote a lot of book reports, but I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I wouldn't count that.
Okay. So then this book club with Finnegans Wake was your first kind of like reading?
Yeah, I had picked up Ulysses before and was like, by myself, not gonna happen.
How are you guys into Finnegans Wake now with the book club?
Oh, that was, I think, between 5 and 8 years.
Okay.
So we've restarted 3 times.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
The first time we read through it, it was a page or 2 at a time. And the second time we started reading for longer stretches. And we kind of continued that, reading for sound as opposed to picking it apart and trying to find the meanings of small things. We were more just reading it for the flow of sound, which I really prefer.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Okay. And then have you read any of his other works sort of like on your own or in other groups since? Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
Ooh. Well, I love Ulysses. I love Ulysses. Okay. I love every part of it. I'm not as familiar as some. I'm only on my third time through, and the first time was a wash. But it's deeper and deeper and deeper the more you read.
Is Ulysses? Why do you read it over and over again?
Well, if I'm talking to them about Ulysses or Joyce, they probably already qualify as someone who could enjoy Joyce. My main thinking about Joyce is something I discovered about myself late in life, because I'm high functioning, we'll call it, is that he's neurodivergent. He's not a normal person. And I found that in these book clubs, these Joyce book clubs, they're just full of neurodivergent people who are trying to appear normal, but in their private life are more like Joyce. They're not quite normal.
Okay.
And we've seemed to have found each other through Joyce, you know? So Joyce has this layer of normality, the hat and the cane, and he's quite smart. And then he's also a weirdo, you know?
Wow. Okay. That's interesting to think about.
So it's not a normal hierarchical exercise, reading and understanding Joyce. The first assumption is that you don't understand.
Okay.
Which puts everybody on a level playing field.
Yes, I think that that's so true. I think a lot of times people kind of see Ulysses as this, you know, like the place for like the scholars or people who know the text super well. But I think all of us start when we're going there being like, this is not what I know how to read or what I normally read.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's so good for your brain. It's so good for your brain.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a normal person in some ways. I've watched a lot of movies and I've read a lot of books. And at this point in my life, if I turn on a movie in the first 5 minutes, if I already know everything that happens, I'm done.
Okay.
It's not even interesting anymore. It's not enjoyable. Same thing with a lot of books. If you open it, you already know in the first 5 pages what's going to happen. I don't even care.
Gotcha. Okay, so do you read other kinds of, I've been talking with some people like as part of this project about like encyclopedic novels. So things like Ulysses also being compared to like Infinite Jest or Gravity's Rainbow. Like, are those the kind of books that you read to like keep that like challenge? Or
I don't think I could actually describe the books I read in any unifying way.
Okay.
I really loved sci-fi when I was a kid. Read everything by Asimov and Heinlein and Philip K. Dick and all of that growing up. Loved sci-fi and Vonnegut. And it's only just because of talking to other people that I even branched out away from sci-fi. But yeah, I have to say in the last 10 years, my favorite author that I go to whenever I need to read is Lauren Isley.
Okay.
That's my first choice of reading.
Okay. I haven't read any of that yet. I'll have to get on it.
Oh, you'll fall in love.
Like I sort of had this experience where like the first time that I read him, I was like, what's happening? And I had already kind of heard that he was like difficult. So I went into it with an assumption that I couldn't really do it. And then I kind of had a moment where it clicked over and I was like, okay, no, like I just need to put the time into it, you know, and really focus on this. So I'm wondering if you had any preconceptions about Joyce before you had read his work, or maybe like having just read Portrait that first time. And then if there was a moment that like shifted it for you.
I don't know. It's so strange with Joyce. I was lucky to be part of a group. So if you're part of a group, you're just going to go with their flow. So it makes it easy to say, oh yeah, well, I just got into Joyce and I just read him. But it isn't until you've been reading him for a while, and it's not just reading. You're falling into traps and you're climbing out, and there's so many layers of understanding. Sometimes you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you're just reading, especially because of the group. You're just reading to stay up with what they're reading, and you're trying to understand. And then there's a sentence or a paragraph that goes, and you're like, oh, I want another one of those, you know?
Yes.
You just keep going until you find another one of those. And then the next one doesn't even look like the last one. You're like, oh, another one. It's like digging for gold, you know, but it's something that connects with something so deep in your brain and so much a part of you that you don't see it, you know?
Okay. Yes. No,
And I think it's different for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
you know?
I like that. Yeah. Like which one will stand out and be that like sentence that gets you is none of us experience it the same way. I love that. Fantastic.
But you know, the fact that often to understand or enjoy Joyce, you would do it with a group, makes the experiment different than if you're reading it by yourself. Because I did try and read it alone, and I chopped away at it, you know. But it's a book that needs to be discussed, and it's a book that needs to be heard. And most people sitting alone won't read out loud. For sure. One of the advantages I gave myself reading Joyce this time is that I was invited to read it in Italian with Italians on Zoom. And it's terrifying. I don't speak Italian at all, but Ulysses needs to be read in its own pace. And it's a much slower pace than I would normally read. I normally read either as fast as I can for information or at storytelling speed to hear a story. So in my head, I would use my internal dialogue as storytelling speed. But reading it in Italian, I have to go one word at a time. Wow. I have to understand what kind of sentence it is, what kind of phrase it is, what kind of word it is. And also I have this great book which has the Italian on one side and English on the other. So I can see how the person who is translating understood that sentence to be, and what they changed about it and what they tried to keep the same. And so it's really slowed down my reading into like bits, you know. And I think that after the first time through, the second time through, you might as well just get really in there, you know. Wow. So it was kind of a whim, like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And now I'm so glad that I'm doing it. You could say, well, I have to read the annotations because I don't quite understand, but it's just another layer of depth to the novel, the annotations. I'm not quite Irish enough. In fact, I'm half English. So
horrifying.
But their cultures are so kind of intertwined that a lot of the lilt comes in, a lot of the little rhymes and things come in. Okay. You know, but I don't know what it would be like if you didn't have any Irish or European in you. Like I heard that there's a Chinese translation. I can't imagine what that sounds like or reads like.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. One thing you might want to check out, it's not, I think it was, have you ever heard of the podcast Balloons and Barnacles? Okay, they just kind of like, it's just kind of like, I don't want to say annotations, but they're just kind of like reading through Ulysses and sort of like talking it through sort of paragraph by paragraph. So it's not like, you know, word by word explaining everything, but it's like pretty full, like they're long episodes. But one of the episodes that they got someone who's working on or studying, I think, this Japanese translation of Finnegans Wake. And I'm like, Finnegans Wake isn't even in English. Like, how do you translate it? And then it's like, you know, from like a like alphabetical like writing system into like I don't know the words, but you know what I mean? Like, so it's just like
kanji and kana.
Yeah, exactly. And so they like honestly probably half an hour of that episode is them just talking about like river run, just that first word and how you change it into this like Japanese symbol. And I'm like,
oh, I want to see that.
Yeah, it's super cool. I can send you the link if you want, but
yeah, do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cool. And then it's really cool. Like I've heard this in like, not just about Joyce, but it seems to kind of stand out in him, is that when you do like translate it across these cultures that like, you know, don't really have much of a shared political history, it kind of ends up that people like still accept the author, and you'll hear things like, oh, like Joyce is like just so Japanese in the way that he writes, just because like the translations have been so gorgeous that like makes it all click together. So
Yeah,
yeah.
he's kind of above culture. He's observing it and
Okay.
commenting on it, but he's above it,
Okay.
or next to it, or underneath it. I don't know, but he's not quite in it. He's an observer.
Speaking of like culture, I've heard from a lot of people that some of their best experiences with Joyce haven't even been with his like text or talking about him, but more like these events that people host. So things like celebrating Bloomsday or reading The Dead on January 6th. Do you have any experiences like that?
I've done that a few times.
Oh,
It's funny. I wasn't able to be the kind of reader I wanted to be because I had kids and I worked, so
mhm.
I would struggle along with what I could do. Often I would come to the book club meetings at night after a 12-hour day and sit at the table and just pinch myself under the table to stay awake because I really wanted to read it, but I was
Mhm.
always kind of out of it. I've been to two Bloomsdays um, after work, and one of them, it was on a Sunday, and I was a cook for a long time, and it was after Sunday
Okay.
brunch. And I remember going there and being like, yeah. And I sat down, and 2 hours later, I woke up
Oh
and I
no.
had just been asleep for the whole thing. But it didn't matter. You can sleep through it and still enjoy it. And no one was mean to me. It was so nice. It was pretty open, just wanting to be there. Yeah, it's a kind group of people. It's a very accepting group. I think to love Bloom, you have to love everyone. Anyone who wants to rejoice is invited to rejoice.
I
You
think that
know?
that's fantastic. I think that that's so true. I don't know. Sometimes I think people get this idea that there's like this big gap where it's sort of like the scholars are over here and then the fans are over here and they're kind of each doing their own thing. But I don't know, like you said, like the more people that I talk to, it really just seems like everyone is just so excited about it and wants to talk about it with whoever they can. And it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. When I'm an identical twin, and in junior high,
Mhm.
they introduced the idea of AP classes.
Okay.
So my practical mind said, okay, if I take an AP class and I get a B, then I get an A. An A goes on your transcript for a B for an
Okay.
AP class. I'm like, well, that's a good deal. And then both I and my sister were in the first 3 weeks of this AP English course. And what the teacher did was he had us diagramming sentences. It was nightmarish and
Ew.
very difficult. And we did that for weeks. And at the end of that bit of learning, he said, okay, how many of you would like to stay? And I was like, well, even if I fail, I can't get an F. So,
Yeah.
and even though this is really hard, I haven't been able to think about anything else. I was not distracted. I was really kind of into it and trying to figure it out. And I'm like, well, if I stay in the AP program, then I'm with people who are smart and who really want to figure things out, and we can't fail. But
Hmm.
if I leave, then I go back to regular classes that are kind of boring. So I
Hmm.
stuck with it, and my sister didn't. And
Okay.
it's made all the difference.
Okay. Interesting.
It's not that smart people go to AP classes.
Mm-mm.
What that teacher was choosing for was for people who will keep trying, and like the ultra nerds,
Okay.
you know?
That's so true. Yes.
And because I started choosing for that, I continued choosing for that. And personally, not having any degrees or qualifications, you can only be as smart or as interested as the people you surround yourself with. Being so poor that you can't get out of an environment of ignorance,
Mhm.
and willful ignorance has always been a nightmare of mine, because those are dangerous people. So I've found that the more intellectual and heady a person is, the more accepting they are of odd behavior and different ways of thinking, and the
Mhm.
less judgmental they are. Have you found
Okay.
that to be true?
Yes, I think overall, I think there's always like some, you run into like a professor for just because like I'm in a master's program right now, so that's sort of like the intellectual people in my life. But every now and then I run into a professor where I'm just like, bro, like you don't have to make fun of every single one of my ideas. But like overall, I would definitely say like as a general rule, it is like being with just like as sort of like a metaphor, I guess, but like being with people who are like willing to put the time into reading things like Ulysses. Yeah, I think it signifies a lot more than that they like reading difficult books. It signifies that they're willing to like listen to weird ideas and,
Yeah.
that they'll take the time to hear you. Yeah.
And willing to feel stupid.
Yes, that's so true. No, that's fantastic.
It's a great thing to be stupid. You get smarter.
Yes, I totally agree. I feel that old maxim of you never want to be the smartest one in the room, because I'm like, what are you learning? But
yeah. So what's your master's degree in?
So it's in English literature.
With a focus on Joyce?
Yeah, well, sort of, it's more technically sort of like 20th century literature, but like Joyce is always there for sure. He's sort of I feel like he's my like sounding post a lot of times, where I'll sort of, find a topic that works with him. And then from there expand to like other authors and see what works. So it's nice to have that, uh, for me, he has been a way to sort of keep myself grounded in a like vast array of topics and this really wide like historical period. So he's a nice constant.
Cool. What made you decide to do that? Are you going to be a teacher, or what's the idea?
I don't really know. I thought that I wanted to be a professor, but now I'm not so sure. And I think I'm really just like, it just seems like something that's important and on my mind and won't leave me alone. So I might as well like follow it and write about it and talk to people about it. And
have you ever wanted to be a writer?
Not a fiction. I really enjoy writing essays and that sort of thing. Like yes, right. It's fantastic. I know some people really like can't stand. I think that that's like the nerdy side that we were talking about, but there's something about just writing a nicely structured essay and having people read it and be like, oh, I see your point, or I disagree with you, but I can still see what you're saying. Like, it's just such a rush. But so I really love that. But yeah, I'm not much of a like fiction writer. I don't know. Do you write fiction?
From childhood on, I wanted to be a writer.
Oh,
and
wow.
Now that I have time during the whole COVID thing, there's nothing going out. There's only information coming in. So I'm still waiting. I've written some poetry.
Oh, cool.
But also, the more you read, and especially after reading Joyce, you're like, well, I'm not that. No. So why even bother? But no, I do have some aspiration. Okay. It's funny. I just found out a few years ago from my children, who found out on the internet, that not everyone has an internal dialogue.
Wow,
I thought everyone did that.
Crazy.
I have been narrating my life as if I'm a character in a story for most of my life.
That's fantastic.
Describing the rain and the books on the shelf and the situation and who this person is. It's how I make sense of the world.
Okay.
Do you do that?
I do. Well, I'll like send one back at you. So I do have an internal dialogue. I definitely sort of like narrate my life, as you say, or like when I'm like planning my day ahead, it's sort of like I'm writing a story, and then I see how much life matches up to it. But I don't have like mental images. So I don't have like a mind's eye, which apparently is one of those things. I think like all of our experiences in our own brain, we just assume everyone has the same thing. So just like a couple years ago, I find out that most people like see pictures in their head. And I was like, what? So I don't know if you do. I feel like the way to test it that I figured out is if you like close your eyes and just like think of a star. And then like, what do you see?
Too many. There's too much information.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I think of all the different ways I've seen stars.
Okay.
There's too many pictures.
That's cool. Yeah. So, but I think that this is really like thinking about like how our brains work with that like internal dialogue, or the mental like mind's eye, I guess, has really like shaped the way that I think about my reading. Because when people talked about sort of like seeing a movie in your head as you read, I always thought that was sort of like just a metaphor, because that doesn't happen to me. I'm just very much like in the words. So then when I figured out that people are like, no, actually like seeing images in their brain of the story, it really like made me, made me rethink what reading is to me and why I enjoy it if it's not this thing that most people say it is. So
Yeah, what an invisible kind of conundrum. Like, who is your
yeah.
audience? Are you writing for those people? Are you writing for sound people? I think that's why Joyce
Yes.
stands the test of time, because all of those different ways of thinking and reading work.
Yes, that's so true. I remember the first time I was in a Joyce book club, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we were talking about that exact thing in the very first chapter, where where Stephen is like looking out at the sea from the Martello Tower and everything. And for me, it was like all about like the sounds and like the way that the words are, like going with each other and kind of reflecting the waves washing and all this stuff. And then everyone else, or like most of the people in the book club were like, I can like visualize, like I can perfectly picture what this like pool looks like. So it's so cool how like all of us had this very different experience of what the text is showing us.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say, though, another thing I discovered about my own personal internal dialogue is, like I said, I'm an identical twin.
Mm-hmm.
My twin has lived overseas, either in Germany or Australia, for the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I only see her maybe once a year. And during COVID, I haven't seen her at all. So once a year, once every 2 years. And I realized, especially after being by myself a lot,
Mm-hmm.
when I visit her, when I'm with her in her presence, in her physical presence, I have no internal dialogue.
Oh, interesting.
So apparently I was telling her, which I did not realize myself. That's who the dialogue was going towards. I was silently sharing my life with someone who wasn't present.
Wow.
So I don't know if singletons can say anything like that, but I think your internal dialogue might not just be for you.
Okay.
It's a translation into the world of your thoughts. Because your thoughts, like I said, when I close my eyes and I visualize the star, there's a lot of different stars in there. It's not just one star, so inside your head, it's just a jumble of electricity information. But as soon as you form words to someone, it narrows the information down.
Okay.
Now, I also have ADHD, and narrowing information is a big job. Prioritizing is a huge job. And as anyone who knows me really well knows, I don't do that well. But you don't have to do that to read Joyce.
That's so true. Oh my gosh.
It's all just there.
Yeah, you don't have to pick and choose what he's saying. You get everything from like 5 billion different perspectives, and you don't have to pick one.
Yeah, I was lucky to stumble onto Joyce, actually. Yeah. I think I've stumbled through my whole life, which makes Bloom even easier to connect with. Hey, just stumbling through life like we all are. Just doing what he does and trying.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
But ultimately on the outside.
Is there anything from our conversation that we had that will sort of stand out to you? Whether it's something that sort of like clicked in your mind that you finally got to say, or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, it has been. This is probably going to be the memorable conversation about Joyce.
Okay.
I would think, because I haven't really voiced any of these things before.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm nobody, and my immediate surroundings is not people who care about Joyce. So most of the stuff, most of my thoughts on Joyce and reading just stay inside my head, which is a nice place. I don't usually get to share them. like thinking that that Joyce and Bloom, like me, are outsiders and neurodivergent is really good for me. It makes me feel less stupid and unimportant, or makes me feel like being unimportant is not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Oh, yeah, I love that. I think that Joyce really does. I think we kind of get into this habit of talking about Joyce as like celebrating the ordinary man, or like celebrating every day. And I think that those things have kind of become a bit cliche, like we just say it so often, but really it's this like hugely important thing that I think like a lot more people probably feel like that, like feel like you than we think. And Joyce is kind of this place where we can recognize it together.
Yeah, when you think of an everyman, you think of kind of a bumbler.
Yes.
So but the way people go about their lives these days seems to be conflating themselves into a celebrity, or at least admiring only the best and only the richest and only the most pretty. And that's not an everyman, that's an anomaly. You know? So preferring to read or think or talk or engage with just regular people who aren't anybody, I think is not only really safe, really safe, that person is not going to probably try and hurt you or humiliate you, you know, where if you want to hobnob, you're going to be humiliated because you set yourself up for it, you know? For so sure. being stupid or wrong in a Joyce book club is not possible.
I love that. And I think it's so, I don't know. I remember when I first started reading Joyce, I felt like he was like making fun of me. I don't know if it's just because you know what I mean? Like I wanted to be that scholar who like understands every single word. And it was a little bit, and I remember it's probably one of the first books that I ever had to like give up on the first time that I tried it. And it was just so embarrassing. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's something that I'm definitely going to take away from this is now that you've said it, it really like I'm recognizing in myself how much that has changed and how like, yeah, when everyone feels stupid. Like,
well, you know, the other thing about Joyce is Joyce, I think, I don't know if he would be counted as an olive. Do you know what an olive is? OLLAVE. It was a kind of, a type of academic or poet or bard. And it was an old type of schooling in Ireland. And I think it was 7 years or more. And your first year, you memorized 150 historical or ancient bardic poems, tales. Wow. And you would memorize and memorize and memorize. And I've heard that Joyce had an eidetic memory and that he at least aspired to be an olive. And so when you read Joyce assumes, I think, maybe assumes isn't the right word, but for him, all of your reading follows the things that you've read before and assumes that you understand mythology, that you've at least had a taste of the ancient readings of your tribe or people or humanity or whatever. And so if you try to read Joyce for entertainment, like you would a beach book, that's not the type of book it is. It builds on what mythology and what stories already exist in your background of stories, you know, and he chooses from those. So to read Ulysses or anything by him, especially Finnegans Wake, without other people and without talking about what goes into making that story, it's really difficult if you don't already have it in your head. You know, sure. So reading with a group, you find out that like the one chapter, and I can't even remember the name of it, where each paragraph or section follows a different type of literature from ancient times. Like if you didn't know that, you'd be like, what is going on? What is this? You know, it's good to know that structure. So you kind of have to have Joyce friends to read Joyce and really get a lot out of it, which I think is a plus. It's a group thing. It assumes that you're part of a group, even as an outsider. So it's the nerd herd safe space.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, you're going to keep learning. You're going to keep learning as you read.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's a very, like you say, like a safe space to do that, because I think in Ulysses, there's always like everyone has something in Ulysses that they recognize, and they'll be the sort of like hero who's like, I know this because I've read this one old text. But then I think also everyone has that thing in Ulysses where they're like, I don't know what's happening here. And so it's cool to get to play, like, especially in a reading group, like you said, you kind of, everyone gets to play the expert and like the student at the same time.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It is. It is. So lucky. We're so lucky to have fallen into Joyce.